What's up? It's your book club. I'm Imani.
And I'm Mary.
And this is episode 2!
We have more than one episode!
Exactly! It's becoming a thing. So, if you didn't tune in for our first episode, what's your book club? Essentially, it's a podcast where the two of us pick a young adult novel, read it, and then we get together to rant, analyze, and discuss it.
Sometimes we'll pick a book that we both loved as kids, or one that doesn't get as much love as we think it should. So if you have a suggestion for a book we should read, feel free to tweet about it on our Twitter, which is It's Your Book Club?
At It's Your Book Club on the Twitter. This month, we read book 1 of the Dragons in Our Midst series by Bryan Davis, called Raising Dragons. So this is a throwback from middle school. Confession, for a book report, I dressed up as Bonnie. And so this one is one of the ones that is near and dear to both of us.
Yeah, for sure. As always, spoilers for this book, maybe also for the entire series, because we might reference things that happen later. So go check out the book if you haven't yet, or be prepared to have us tell you the whole thing as we talk about it, because there's no holds barred discussing the whole book. You'll get all the spoilers.
Woo woo!
So, summary of the book. Essentially, we start with Billy Bannister. He's your average 14-year-old, he's dealing with his problems of school bullies and trying to be an up-and-coming artist. And also, he has really concerningly hot breath, and he doesn't know why.
He thinks it's some kind of a hormonal thing.
Yeah, it's puberty.
Right. Everybody's body's
it's like
changing.
Into the Spider-Verse. He's like, it's puberty, it's fine. So when he accidentally sets off a fire alarm, he realizes that maybe this is a bit concerning. And through a series of events, he finds out that his dad is actually a dragon that has been turned into a human to keep him safe from these dragon slayers that have been hunting dragons for centuries.
Yeah, since the time of King Arthur.
So his dad's been around as a human since the time of King Arthur, and eventually he fell in love and got married and had a son, Billy, who's starting to manifest
his half-dragon
like traits. So at school, Billy also meets Bonnie Silver, who's sort of the slightly outcast
orphan child.
Kid. Yeah, who's new in the area, and she always wears a backpack and never takes it off.
Suspicious.
And that's very suspicious. What could be inside? And we start to find out that the principal of the school, who recently arrived as well, seems to have taken quite a bit of interest in both of them and their odd behavior. And he decides, after looking at some of Bonnie's school records and where she's been before, that maybe this is someone he's looking for. So he gets some other people. They try and search her to find out what's in her backpack. And she's panicking. And Billy goes to save her. He breathes on one of them and they get a burn. And he's starting to run away. Bonnie has disappeared. And then he gets carried up into the sky, and essentially she saves him. He finds out Bonnie has dragon wings that she's been hiding in her backpack this whole time. So after that, they're both kind of on the run from their principal and his allies, because he also turns out to be one of these dragon slayers.
Right. Evil dude.
So Billy's dad, who's a pilot, flies them all in his small
charter plane.
6-person charter plane to avoid the dragon slayer. But then after he's told this whole story about how the dragons were transformed into humans, and we find out Merlin was involved in the time of King Arthur, and
the Candlestone gets revealed, which is thing that's dragon's bane or whatever. It reflects light in a weird way that makes dragons queasy.
Yeah, so it saps their powers. The dragon slayer appears in the back of the plane, threatening to shoot Jared Bannister, the dad, and the dad is like, well, there's a prophecy that he told them about this prophecy that hasn't been fulfilled yet, so it should be fine.
So I can't die.
Yeah. So he gets shot, and then the plane is beginning to crash. The Dragon Slayer kidnaps Bonnie and threatens her and jumps out of the plane with her. And Billy and his mom survive the crash with a parachute. So they're all stranded on the mountain. They face the Dragon Slayer. They get away.
No, they don't face the Dragon Slayer.
They don't. They don't. You're right.
So Bonnie is, like, in the air, and she's just like, no, get away from me. And then she falls, and he falls. And so then she's in the forest by herself, and Bill and his mom are in the forest by themselves, and the Dragon Slayer's looking for him.
You're right. So then Billy goes to try and find a way out and try and find help because his mom can't walk. He finds Bonnie, who's also injured. It's starting to get dark. Mm-hmm. They have to huddle together for warmth because it's cold. Ooh. Beginnings of a romance, perhaps.
Yes.
And then they end up being found? Does anything happen before then, or do they rescue party?
No. The rescue party, which is Walter, his friend, and his teacher, Mr. Hamilton, are, like, around looking for him, and then Walter, like, breaks away because he sees... the principal comes to, like, the search thing, masquerading as an FBI agent, and... Yeah. The kid's like, that's my principal, he's not an FBI agent, and so then they, like, tell the police, but the police is kind of like, well, he has authority, and so then Walter follows him, jumps in the back of his truck.
And knocks him out.
Yeah, and he sees Billy's breath, because Billy, like, actually, like, streams fire out at the guy. Yeah. And, like, incinerates a dude.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and Walter, was it before this that Walter found out about Bonnie?
I don't think so.
Okay. Because at some point he finds out about Bonnie being the bat creature. Because all these kids at school saw this bat creature flying away with this kid. And they're like, what? Is it a conspiracy? What is this creature?
It's that same time that he sees. Because, like, he's like, Devin has both of them. Or has Bonnie or whatever. And so, like, Walter, like, hangs back. And then he sees Billy, like, shoot fire. And he also sees Bonnie's wings. And then, like, waits for Bonnie to cover her wings. And then, like... comes and
then it's
her.
Like, hey, we're here to save you.
Yes.
Yeah. And Walter's we can talk about Walter later, never mind. He's the comic relief character. But then, so they're all back home. They don't know what happened to
They're
Dad.
at Walter's house.
Yes, they're at Walter's house because the bad guys burned down Billy's house. Just because.
Cash.
And Billy's convinced that his dad's still alive because of this prophecy, and things keep appearing on their front porch that give hints that he's alive, and eventually... they track the scent of him, and they find out after a confrontation with Billy and his mom and one of the side dragon slayers. They find out that his dad has transformed back into a dragon and is hiding out in the mountains of West Virginia, and is sort of like, I'll still protect you, but I obviously can't still like be in the world. I have to hide because there's dragon slayers. And this time period doesn't know about dragons.
Be kind of weird.
Yeah, a little bit. So then some stuff happens.
Yes. So
what happens?
The kids are, Bonnie, Walter, and Billy are all being homeschooled by Professor Hamilton.
By the professor.
Because he's that cool.
He's so eccentric.
Very eccentric. He brings weapons to their class and stuff like that and shows them all these things. And so then... Bonnie doesn't show up, and Devin sends Bonnie's hair, like a envelope of Bonnie's hair to Billy, and Billy, like, remembers him cutting off some of Bonnie's hair when she was captured, like, a long time ago, and so he's like, oh, I'm pretty sure that she's not actually captured, but on, like, the off chance, that she is, I'm gonna go try and save her, whereas Walter and his dad decide that they're gonna go to Bonnie's parents' house, because Bonnie's foster parents were accused of neglect and arrested, and then Bonnie was sent to Arizona, is what they said.
Yeah. Montana.
You're right. Montana.
It's fine. It's not relevant to the story. So they go there and they look for her, and they're kind of looking around their room, see like, oh, she seems to be decently taken care of. These don't seem like negligent parents.
Right.
And kind of realize that the cops are actually also working with Devin the Dragon Slayer. So Walter figures out this crazy way to get rid of the cops, which we can talk about later which is funny. And then they were like, maybe she isn't gone. Like, they piece it together. Like, she would have taken
why would they
stuff.
still be here?
Yeah, stuff like that. And so then they call out to her, and it turns out she was hiding. She realized what was going on, so she hid in the attic.
Because, like, her, like, knees busted because of, like, falling out of a plane, and, like...
So she can't run away.
Right.
Yeah. So they find her, she's okay, but she realizes that Billy's gone to confront the Dragon Slayer because he thinks I'm kidnapped, so she has to go help him.
So she...
but they don't know about her wings, so she convinces them to bring her up to the mountain and then leave.
Right, which is like, wow.
Which they do.
Yes, and Billy is, like, confronting Devin, and, like, he gets, like, captured, and then he gets, like, almost killed, and then his dad comes in dragon form, and it's just like, Rawr!
Yeah, and his dad comes to save him, but the Dragon Slayer has a candle stone which weakens dragon powers, and so is going to kill the dragon as well.
Yes, which was his plan all along.
Yeah, was like to lure the dragon out and then kill him.
Right, it's like double bait. You know, Bonnie was bait till Billy could be baited, and then now Billy's bait. Yeah. It's like, wah!
Yeah. So, at that point, Bonnie gets there? No.
They
find Billy.
does. Yes, Walter
and Walter find Billy.
They, like, shoot him with a crossbow. They shoot the Paladin guy. The bad guy.
Yeah.
With an arrow as he's, like, about to chop Billy's head off or something like that.
Yeah. And so then they save Billy and they bring him back to, like, the base of the mountain.
Yes.
Because he's dying and bleeding out.
Yes.
And so then Bonnie sees the Dragon Slayer about to kill the dragon.
Yeah.
She flies down and confronts him even though she's weak from the candlestone and all this stuff. There's a fight, and the Dragon Slayer drops this sword that seems to have etchings on it and maybe be magical. And Bonnie picks it up to defend him even though she's
it's
dying.
Like heavy, and she's like, ah!
Yeah, and she's like a 14-year-old and injured. And then something happens. She's like praying, like, please help me. Something magic happens. And the sword sort of does this, like, beam out of the blade.
Yes.
And she points it at the Dragon Slayer, and he's essentially disintegrated into light. We don't find out till later the mechanics of it, but we do find out in the next book.
Right.
But he's disintegrated into light and disappears. And she's kind of like, oh, okay, cool, I'm glad we're alive. Yes. And the dragon's still alive.
Right, and he says,
the rest of...
go help Billy. And so then she, like, runs and goes to Billy.
Yeah, and then Billy wakes up in the hospital.
Yes.
And
Walter brings him his cat.
Walter sneaks in Billy's cat that had run away. And then at the end, Dr. Hamilton's like, oh yes, I have this tape recording that Bonnie read of, like, all of my notes of what happened and all the lore that I've figured out. Everything's very interesting. And Billy thinks about, I'm not the only dragon child. That's cool.
Yeah. Oh, and Walter's family adopts Bonnie.
Yeah, I forgot about that. Because Bonnie's like, yeah, so Walter's family's adopting me. That's
I met
cool.
my parents, too.
Yeah.
Super cute.
That was probably a super convoluted summary, considering that this plot of this book is less complicated than some of the later ones.
I think it was great. I think you did that well.
Okay, thanks.
Alright, so now it's time for our ad break. As you probably already know from last episode, we don't have sponsors. So, if you have a product that you would like sponsored on this podcast, let us know. You can reach out to us on Twitter or...
Just Twitter. Just Twitter so far.
Just Twitter right now. Just Twitter. That's all. Let's get to those ads!
Do-do-do-do-do. Oh man, I can't believe this happened again. I always set off the fire alarms. Yeah, bro, that's real rough. But have you considered minty fresh breath mints? No, what are those, bro? Well, bro, let me tell you about it. Minty fresh breath mints are the only pharmaceutically provided breath mints that deal with really bad breath. Well, I definitely have really bad breath, bro. Do you think they'll work? I've been using minty fresh breath mints, that's what I called them, right?
Yes.
For years, and I've never had a problem with my breath. Everyone loves them, and they always comment on how great my breath smells. It helps with heat, it helps with dog breath or dragon breath, any kind of breath you have. If you have breath, these are for you. Wow, well, what varieties do they have, bro? Well, bro, they've got classic peppermint. They've got spearmint. They've even got cinnamon, though. If you've got hot breath, bro, I don't know if you're gonna want that. They've even got some fruit-flavored ones, if you're not a fan of the mint kind, that still cool your breath just as well, bro. Wow, bro, thanks! I'll be sure to check out minty fresh breath mints at a place near me. I don't know what places sell them, but I intend to find out, bro. Yeah, bro! Bro hug. Fist bump.
Manly hug.
Minty fresh breath mints at a store near you.
So, a couple of things that I found out about reading about the author and stuff like that. Nothing too, like, major. He has a pretty, like, not great website. No offense, Bryan Davis. With his
You need a web designer.
Right? His Wikipedia is, like, very small. He's, like, from Virginia. He has 7 kids, and they homeschooled them all. He went to seminary.
He was a computer scientist, right?
Yes, he was. He did computer stuff for, like, 20 years, and then was just like, I'm gonna be a writer, which, mad respect, man. So then he writes all of these books, but the piece of gold that I found was it was made into a movie in 2013.
What? Like a real movie or like a fan movie?
So it's supposedly a real movie. You can read all about it on christianfriendsproduction.com, which I'm pretty sure is just like a family who decided that they really liked Dragons in Our Midst, and so then they wanted to make a version of it themselves. I will also send you the trailer. The trailer will be in the show notes. Thank you, everyone.
Wow.
It's... You know, I don't want to, like, be mean to people who put hard work and effort into it, but it is awful.
Yeah, I mean, doing a high fantasy, like, movie just, like, with no budget as a project...
Bad idea.
It's real rough.
Yeah. So it's, like, available for, like, by purchase request only. They, like, made, like, 500 DVDs, and they, like, had it on YouTube for a second, and then they took it off. But you can, like, ask them, and they will send you a DVD for, like, $10.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Also was made into a graphic novel, which I'm sure is much better.
Yes! I remember that. That was, like, an official, like, published, like, thing. It wasn't just, like, a project.
Yeah. So I sincerely hope that you watch the trailer and that everybody listening goes and watches the trailer, because it was very funny.
Man, I want to see that. I feel like I've seen little bits of like, oh, me and my friends just acted out this scene, but that's about it.
It's like, how are you gonna do dragon wings? I didn't see any of the special effects. It was just, like, very funny. Anyway, character time.
Especially for you as a film major, probably.
It was so bad. Characters. Billy. This is my favorite thing. So just for all the listeners, my mom, they have, like... Sorry, when I start reading the book, I have, like, a lot of, like, notes that I write for the first couple chapters, and then, like, as I get into the book, I quickly stop writing notes because I'm, like, actually reading the book. But...
Yeah.
Thankfully, for the beginning of the book, I was, like, still in the mode of, like, oh, I should take notes on this. And, like, Billy's, like, character introduction is so funny. It is gold. He's, like, this artist guy who, he, like, comes downstairs for breakfast, and he's like, can I do the dishes, Mom? Here, it's okay, you don't have... I want to donate the money that I got for to the Humane Society. And he's just, like, this, like, complete goody two-shoes that you're like, who is this child?
And then he just, like, wrestles with his dad good-naturedly on the kitchen floor. And drinks some of his dad's coffee.
What slice of life is this that I'm looking at?
It feels like an old, like,
yeah,
you know, those, like, those TV shows that are, like, high schoolers discover a mystery.
Mm-hmm. Hardy
and, like,
Boys.
It's a little cheesy. Yeah, it feels a little like that.
Yes, it does. Also, this is definitely where I discovered my love for deep pockets.
Oh,
because in the first couple chapters, he talks about, like, all of the things that he, like, fits in them, and I'm like, what?
Yeah.
I want cargo shorts.
Yeah, because he's got, like, pens and pencils and a sketchbook.
Yeah.
And, like, yeah.
Yeah. Definitely not fair. Also, it starts off with a nightmare. Classic.
Yeah.
classic.
He has a dream about being a dragon. Ooh, foreshadowing. And,
comes out of nowhere.
Fighting this knight, which... I mean, it's a classic fantasy thing to, like, have dreams that actually kind of fit.
Mm-hmm.
It is funny, because I remember in the third book, there's this dream that, like, kind of is foreshadowing, but it's also like, there's a penguin who gives him an umbrella and says it's gonna rain, and, like, is so absurd. Whereas this one, like, feels super, like, cinematic, like, you know, like, dreams and stories that make sense. Yeah. But he has a dream about being a dragon and fighting this knight, and then he wakes up and he's like, wow, my breath is really hot.
Yeah.
And that's how we're introduced to him having hot breath, and he's just like,
yes. And, like, the kids apparently at school... Right, yeah, and he has the mouthwash song stuck in his mouth, which is, tired of that old doggy breath? Make it clean with super fresh.
Yeah. And everybody calls him Dragon Breath.
And everyone calls him Dragon Breath. And you're like, please, what? Okay, but it does, like, kind of do stuff later on, because he, like, blows on his food. Like, warms it up.
Like his Pop-Tarts on the bus. And it says he blew on a Bunsen burner one time. Well, his Bunsen burner didn't work, so he blew on the test tube in his lab to heat it up, because he's just an idiot child.
Right.
He's a sweet boy.
He's a sweet boy. Very sweet boy. Yeah, so he's artsy and, like, definitely goody two-shoes. What bugged me in the first, like, 2 chapters was, like, when he gets caught with the lighter, because, like, fire alarm just, like, went off, and, like, this kid Adam obviously was the one who set it off. Right, yeah. But Billy accidentally breathed on it, and that set off the fire alarm, so...
Yeah, and then Adam, like, puts the lighter in his hand and is like, oh, it's yours.
Right. And, like, for one thing... Billy gets to get up to use the bathroom because he had, like, a root beer, like, 30 minutes before. I don't buy it. Every guy I know can hold it for, like, 6 to 8 hours.
Well, no, what he did, he drank coffee and orange juice at breakfast.
Okay.
And then he drank a bunch of water at the drinking fountain because his breath was really hot, and then he also drank a root beer.
Okay.
But
I'm
still,
a little, that does console a little better, because I was like, you just had a root beer like 2 seconds ago, and now you gotta pee, like, that's not real. Anyway, but he goes to the bathroom, and then, like, that whole thing happens, and Professor Hamilton sees him, and then he's just like, well, clearly we need a fair trial for these boys, even though one of them's always in trouble, and the other one's a goody two-shoes that we're paying to make a mural. It's like, who do you think is to blame here? Like, what? Yeah. Which is so weird because, like, the rest of the book, like, the adults are very reasonable people and, like, more reasonable than, like, they would be in real life. But, like, for this just, like, one thing. And, like, there's this one, like, Mrs. Roberts or whatever who's the actual worst.
She's just the worst.
She loves
hates
Adam.
All the nice people. And,
and, like, loves the idiot child.
And she's so mean to Bonnie. Like, she calls her, like, trailer trash. And is like, mate, this is why you don't have any friends. Even though Bonnie's, like, the best person in the world.
Yeah, Transitioning to talk about Bonnie, like, oh my goodness, this girl is so grown up, and she's like, she watched her mother die, and, like, everyone's such a jerk to her, because she's like, oh, ew, orphans. Like,
which, like, they're in, like, middle school, right? That's kind of believable. True. But it's true. Bonnie... I'm curious, what are your thoughts on her, like, liking her or disliking her as a character? Because she seems... It's funny because, like, she seems to be the most controversial character in terms of people either loving her or really hating her as a character, from what I've talked to from other people.
Yeah, so she's, like, the only, like, clearly Christian, like, faith-believing character.
Yeah.
And she's also, like, the one who is the most calm in everything. Yeah. Like, which also, she has, like, the most obvious, like, she has the wings. So
yeah, she has wings. In her backpack, she cuts holes in her clothes to put them on.
Super cool. And so she, like, definitely has a lot of that going for her as, like, she's, like, had to grow up a lot faster, and she's, like, lived this, like, awful life where she's just, like, everyone thinks I'm weird because I won't let grown-ups hug me because they're gonna see my wings and they're gonna freak out and take me to, like, the place where they take aliens, Area 51 or whatever. And so she just, like, has to be distant from everyone. And then they're all just, like...
Even though she's, like, super lovey and nice.
Yeah. And, like, one of the sweetest things about, like, her and, like, Billy's, like, friendship, like, when it, like, starts, is that she's just, like, wow, like, I can actually let another human hug me and not be terrified that they're going to, like, find out. which is, like, the most heartbreaking thing.
It really is. Wow.
So,
yeah,
yes, I'm a Bonnie sympathizer. I liked Bonnie. There are some people who are like, she's annoying and too perfect and whatever. You know what? She's got dragon wings.
I know. I always wanted dragon wings as a kid.
Yeah.
For, like, years, I was like, that would be the coolest thing. I really want wings. And then I was like, wait, I live overseas. How would I get through airport security? Like, I considered these things. And I was like, maybe I could just fly over the Pacific? That seems like a long way. But, like, I really want wings. That'd be cool.
Yeah.
I, like, looking back at my childhood, really, like, idolized her as a kid. Like, I remember in the later books, you get, like, excerpts of, like, her journal, which is, like, she writes prayers, and she's super spiritual, and I was like, oh, I should do that. And so then I wrote, like, really flowery, cheesy stuff in my journal, because I was trying to be really eloquent like Bonnie, but, like, wasn't a great writer. And, like...
That's precious. Yeah. That's
but
awesome.
She's an interesting character, because I feel like she doesn't have, like, a character arc in the same way. Like, she doesn't have, like, I have this flaw that's causing problems and I have to overcome it. She has outside things that are creating conflict for her. And, like, how do I do this thing or love these people but also do this other thing?
Right. Which, like, yeah. And one of the bigger things that she has is, like, she is, like, a Christian, and then, like, Devon's like, ew, you're, like, a descendant of serpents, and, like, clearly you're a devil child. Like, God hates you. Which is, like, a lot for a 14-year-old.
Yeah.
You know? So...
Yeah, especially when that's such a big part of who she is her faith.
Right, exactly.
But
and so,
then, like, he's, like, being like, don't you know dragons in the Bible are, like, evil? Like, you're
like
obviously...
Satan himself. Okay, back off. Right.
Calm down.
Right, and so, like, yeah, she does have a terrible teacher who's just like, this is why you don't have any friends.
Yeah.
Like, it is, like, all external struggles, and, like, you, I guess, don't really see her wrestling with that too much in the first book, at least. Not in this one.
You see it some later.
Right.
Because the second book is a lot more about her.
Right, because the first book is definitely more about Billy.
Yeah, it's his arc.
Right. And, like, Billy goes from, like, oh, I found out that I'm, like, a dragon. And I thought it was really interesting because he was just like, oh, like, there is a definite, like, he and his dad were super close. Like, the first couple of scenes, he, like, wrestles with his dad and, like, loves him. And then it's like, oh, he lied to me my entire life.
Yeah.
And, like, that's a huge thing for him because he's like, I want my dad to be alive. But then part of him's just like, but, like, I'm still really mad at him and I don't really know how to, like, deal with this because it's, like, hard feelings. And he, like, doesn't really share about that. But he does deal with it in a very mature way.
There's a while where it's super awkward because his dad is a dragon now and he doesn't know how to relate. And, like, he keeps referring to him as the dragon. Like, he won't call him dad for a while. And his mom's like,
yeah,
what are you doing? Like, I'm so sorry. But, and then, like, realizes, like, oh, I can see how this is super hard for you. Because it's just like, why didn't you just didn't tell me anything? Whereas Bonnie had a very different experience because her wings grew when she was, like, 5, and so she always knew.
Right.
Whereas Billy's just got that, like, I discovered my secret identity. My dad's secretly an ancient dragon.
Right.
I feel like that's a huge arc of the story for him, is, like, trusting his dad. And, like, there are these things showing up at the doorstep, and, like, the reason they find out his dad's still alive is because Billy's like, no, I'm not going to believe he's dead. He said he would survive. I have to trust him.
Right. Also, like, beginning of the book, like, well, the beginning of, like, their interactions when he's just like, you lied to me, and he's like, this is awful. His dad says, I'm sorry. Like, the first thing, his dad's just like, you're right. I messed up. This was not the best way to handle this. And you're like, what?
Like a reasonable adult?
Which I feel like is coming from Bryan Davis's, like, dad center.
Yeah.
You know? Because he's just like, there are things that I try to do to protect my kids that I'm sure I'm doing wrong. And, like, to be faced with one of those and being like, you know what? I'm sorry. Is like, wow. Way to go, Dad.
Yeah. I really appreciate that the parents, and we can talk about this more later, but that the parents are, like, integral characters and aren't just like, oh no, we have to be secret so that the parents don't find out because then they'll stop us.
Right, and you really think it's going to be like that from the very beginning because, like, Billy has this, like, fire breath that he hasn't told his parents about, and he, like, kisses his mom on the cheek, and she, like, winces, and he's just like, dang it, she's gonna find out.
So it seems like this whole, like, kids hiding their secret identities from their parents. But then, like, after they get attacked at school, like, Bonnie and Billy come back home, and his mom's like, okay, like, another dragon kid, what?
Right.
Okay, we gotta go.
Let's
we gotta
go.
leave the house. We're gonna get all our important papers, we're gonna go to the airport and find your dad, and we're gonna leave. And, like, is reasonable and has a plan, since she knows this secret. Like, they have a plan. Which I think is cool, and it's not just like, oh, we just thought no one would ever find out.
We didn't know what would happen.
Yeah.
Walter is the next character. He is, like, Billy's best friend, and they, like, hang out, and they're, like, all, like, bros. And then the, like, Batgirl happens, and he, like, drops Billy or something. Walter goes to Billy's house, and, like, Billy's just like, Walter, we're leaving. And, like, Walter's just like, okay, tell me what's going on. And he's just like, no. Just, like, if my dad comes, just, like, tell him we went to the airport. And Walter's just like, okay.
And he's like, Walter, tell him a dark night is coming quickly. And he's like, what? It's a full moon tonight.
And you're like, Walter, you're not getting it.
Just tell him. Yeah, Walter definitely, especially in this first book, comes across as the, like, comic relief sidekick character.
Yeah.
Like, there's all these jokes about, like, oh, remember that time you did that funny prank? Oh, haha, I'm gonna make this pun.
Right. But even throughout the whole thing, he does things that, like to keep Bonnie and Billy's secret, like, a secret, without asking them to, like, divulge that information to him. So, like, he, like, distracts Mr. Hamilton, and is just like, hey, tell me about those, like, weapons you wanted to talk about. Just, like, leads him out of the room. Or, like, when, like, his, like, mom and Billy are having a discussion about their dad, he's, like, very intentional about, like, trying to protect Bonnie, or being, like, when Billy's, like, wanted to go see his mom when they got rescued, and he was just like, I got her. And you're like, he is, like, the most selfless friend in the series, or very selfless, and, like, surprisingly so for being a 14-year-old boy.
Yeah, Walter's super fun. And I love the part where, like, they're like, oh, there's these cops in front of Bonnie's house, like, guarding the house. And so Walter's like, Dad, don't worry about it. Just wait. I'll get rid of them. And then he, like, runs up and he's like, oh, you'll never guess what I saw. And they're like, what? He's like, I saw a girl with bat wings over by the middle school. And is, like, super dramatic about it, and, like, leaning against a tree, like, oh, I'm so scared. And they're like, oh, okay. And they run off, and then the dad's like, what'd you tell him? And he's like, what they wanted to hear.
And then the dad's like, did you lie?
Yeah, he seems like, I appreciate the integrity, but also lives are at stake.
Not the problem here. Which, like, of course, Walter's just like, no.
Like, I technically told them the truth. I did see her there.
Last week, but
still, I technically told the truth. Throughout this series, he's definitely, like, comes into his own as, like, an actual character, I think. But is still very much the comic relief character for a long time. Because he's just silly.
The day after they get found, and, like, they're at the breakfast table, and Walter's just, like, eating food, and Billy's, like, in shock because his dad just died. And he's just like, you gonna eat that?
And then he gets a whole nother plate of food, and he's so happy. Yeah, Walter eating a lot is, like, a thing throughout the series. Like, they're like, oh, remember that time you ate such and such thing at this camping trip? It's really funny the way it's portrayed, because you have the, like, fun bro banter, but then it's also, like, at the end, they, like, give each other a manly handshake. They're like, yeah, we're friends for life. And they just nod.
Oh my gosh.
They're tough and they're boys.
Right, because we're dudes.
Yeah, bro. Yeah. And then there's Mr. Hamilton, who's the epitome of the eccentric old mentor figure. He's the history teacher. He talks about King Arthur and, like, all of these crazy myths.
And he's also a Christian. I totally forgot. It's not just Bonnie.
He's also a Christian. And is kind of like, I can't really teach a ton about this in school, which is why he's really happy when he can homeschool them, because he can also, like, talk about his faith. But he knows a ton of lore about, like, King Arthur, which is super helpful, because King Arthur's very relevant in the backstory.
Right. And he's also not, like, super aware of, like, a lot of things. So, like, for one, like, all of Billy and Bonnie's, like, fact that they're dragons isn't a thing that he knows in the first book, but also, like, he doesn't know that the principal is, like, evil. And so he's just like, tell me about Bonnie. And so then, like, Dr. Hamilton's like, well, this is... In my head, I'm going, don't tell him anything!
Yeah, but he does piece it together. Like, because Mr. Hamilton sort of has this idea of, like, I've heard all these legends about King Arthur and dragons, and some people say dragons are evil, but I'm not so sure.
Right. And he, like, randomly knows Walter's dad.
Yeah, from Oxford. Like, Walter's dad studied under him at Oxford. And he's like, oh, crazy Carl! Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
But he does piece together eventually that the principal is bad, both because he hears about it, but also because he reads the principal's, like, old notes that he has.
Yes.
About, like, the history of dragon slayers and all this stuff and how dragons are completely evil. And is like, oh, he thinks he's a knight. Like, he's sort of, like, taken on the name of this ancient dragon slayer.
Crazy. Yeah. Yes. And I love that, like, Mr. Hamilton's just like, come on, Walter, like, let's go on this adventure together. And you're like, but we shall call your parents first. No, actually, Walter's like, can I call my parents first? Again, I don't understand these children.
Yeah.
So then Mr. Hamilton, we know, is, like, kind of looks like Merlin.
He does, yes.
That's all we know.
Yeah, it's a big plot point later. There's lots of people in this series that look almost exactly like other people.
Right. Which is like, is that intentional, or...
Yeah. I mean, like, and they use it. It's like a plot point.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, there's somebody that looks like Bonnie later. He looks like Merlin. There's somebody else that looks like somebody.
Gotcha.
There's some twins in the next series, like...
So, like, in King Arthur's time, Merlin... And King Arthur wasn't bad either. Like, King Arthur and Merlin were, like, got all the dragons together and was just like, I will turn you into humans so that you will live and not be killed by the Slayers.
Yes. And Merlin in this isn't a wizard exactly. He's kind of a prophet of God, and so he does miracles, but the Dragon Slayers think he's like an evil wizard magic dude.
Right.
But yeah, he sort of is like, through faith, if you believe, you will be turned into a humans, and so there's one into humans. Yes. So there's one dragon that doesn't quite trust Merlin and like flies off. And so that reveals the secret that, oh, dragons have turned into people. Mm-hmm.
And so now he's just like, well, now you will be stalked for all of eternity. Have fun.
Yeah. I did really like the scene where the dragons turn into people for the first time, because they're like, oh, haha, we get to figure out clothes. This'll be fun. And they're all just standing there naked and just like, I can't figure out how this dress works.
Right.
And Merlin's like, I can't either. Let's pick a different one.
Yeah, that was... Yeah, kind of funny, kind of awkward.
Yeah, it was really cute, because they're just like, I'm a human now.
What a novel idea.
How odd. But one other thing I thought was interesting, Professor Hamilton, like, he has a very strong, like, moral code and, like, good old tradition, the good old days kind of mentality. But there's this part where he's like, oh yes, he fancies himself a knight, but he's really a phony. And they're like, oh, a phony? Because he thinks he's a knight? And he's like, yes, a real knight would never attack women and children. And I'm like, have you... read the history? Like, most knights did that. Like, I get your idea of, like, noble knight code, but, like, historically...
That was so funny. And also, like, the fact that you're like, wait, that's what you... Like, that's what makes him a phony?
Yeah.
Not the fact that we're not in the age of knights anymore.
Because he's not a true knight, because he takes advantage of people, and no true knights in history ever did that.
No, never. Never. Crusades?
Nah. Most of the, like, chivalry things being about how to fight people, and not about protecting anyone. We're gonna ignore that. But yeah, there's this very much, like, clash of good and evil medieval times kind of vibe to the story, even if, like, it's in modern times. Like, I remember Bonnie at one point goes and, like, helps Billy to his feet, and he's like, wow, she has really good balance, like a gymnast or like a swordsman.
Yes.
Like, he points that out and he thinks about it in his mind.
In a minute, or like once we get through these, I have a section where I want to just talk about descriptions, because some of them are golden.
We need to. We really need to.
Let's keep going.
So, Billy's parents.
So Mrs. Bannister is, like, very level-headed. She is a wonderful human, and she just, like, loves her son, loves her husband, and is just like, we planned for this, so, like, we're gonna grab these books, and we are gonna get into the car and go to the airport. And then, like, people are, like, in the car, and the principal comes up and is just, like, smashes the window and is, like, dragging Bonnie out of the car. She's just like, okay, we're gonna do something else.
Yeah. She's like, so we smashed a few pumpkins, it's fine. Like, and drives up on the sidewalk. Yeah, I appreciate her.
Yeah, she is intense. And, like, never loses faith in her husband or her son.
Also, when her husband turns into a dragon, like, that'd be so awkward.
I know, and so sad.
It's, like, yeah, it would just be like, well, like, she's still, like, affectionate.
Right.
But it'd be so
in a broader
awkward.
perspective, it seems worse than if he just died, because then it's like, oh, he's alive, I just can't be with him.
Yeah, and he's not really the same. When she finds him, he's like, "Your Jared Bannister, your husband, is dead, and Clefspear has risen again." And so he's, like, a little bit distant. Like, he's like, I will still take care of you and do everything I can to protect you.
Right.
But he has this sort of level of distance that he's, now that he's dragon again, it would be so hard.
Yeah.
Like, because you can't move on emotionally because he's still alive.
Right, exactly.
But, like, it's also not the same.
And there's Mr. Bannister, who is also Clefspear the dragon. I was reading this, like, fandom wiki or whatever that had, like, all of the different tropes.
Is it? There's a thing that does TV tropes that does that. Is that what it is?
Yes,
I love that.
tvtropes.org. And one of them was talking about jerk with a heart of gold. Clefspear.
Yeah. Yep. Also, that part when Bonnie first meets him, she goes, "Oh, so you do follow the Bible. My mom said you did."
What?
Yeah.
I missed that part.
Yeah, it's like in the plane. Like he's talking about like, oh yeah, in scripture, blah, 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 blah. And so she's like, oh, She's heard things about Clefspear from her mother that are less than kind, because Clefspear's a little bit on the edge.
Mm-hmm. There are other times that, like, she references the fact that she's just like, I don't think my mother trusted him completely. Because she's like, she never told me his name, and also she sent me here on purpose when she died, but, like, we didn't know him before then, so, like, maybe why didn't we know him before then? Why didn't she send me sooner? Yeah, and she's just kind of, like, very suspicious of him. Rightly so.
Yeah.
Rightly so.
Yeah, because Clefspear and Hartana, who's her mom, the dragon, her mom is a dragon, you get a little bit of their, like, slightly mistrustful relationship before. Like, Hartana's kind of in charge of, like, gathering all the good dragons and, like, making sure they're ready to be transformed into humans. And then Clefspear shows up and she's like, well, I haven't talked to you, but if Merlin trusts you, then I guess I trust you.
And he's just kind of, like, full of bravado or whatever, and,
he's like, like, we will fight them, I do this thing.
Yeah, very macho. And Hartana's like, it's interesting, it reminds me of, like, the Greek god sphere of Artemis being more like Hartana, and then, like, Zeus being more like Clefspear, of just kind of, like, smash him up.
Yeah, or even, like, Artemis and Apollo, who are siblings, one being, like, brash and confident, and the other one's a little bit more like, yeah.
Mr. and Mrs. Folly. Mrs. Folly you don't really know all that much about, because she is just, like, really sweet, and just, like, cares, and she, like, goes and buys Bonnie clothes, and she, like, is always just, like, taking care of people, but she doesn't have that much of, like, a personality. But Mr. Folly...
She's not a big character.
Right, she's not. Mr. Folly, on the other hand, like, he gets in there with everyone because he knows, like, Mr. Hamilton. Also, he's, like, a friends with Mr. Bannister, and so, or Mr. and Mrs. Bannister, and so he's, like, a lawyer, maybe?
He's a lawyer.
Yes.
Yeah. Of some kind of attorney, something like that.
Right.
He does law things.
So he's just, like, very much a part of the story. And, like, what surprised me the most was when Bonnie was just like, no, just, like, take me to the center of the woods and then leave me there.
And he's like, what?
And he's like, no. And he, like, begs and pleads, and then he's like, okay.
She's like, please trust me. Like, I'm not going to bargain for your trust. And I think he's really impressed by that. Like, oh.
Right. Because it is very mature to be like, you know what, like, I understand that if you don't trust me now, you aren't going to trust me by me, like, begging for it. Yeah. So, you don't trust me by this point.
Yeah, but he's nice, and when he finds out Bonnie's been, like, sent back, he's like, okay, I'm going to make some calls. I know all the law things, they're not allowed to do this. But he's only really involved in the second half of the story, I think. Mm-hmm. Also, there's a description that Walter gives his father a manly hug. And I thought that was really funny. It's like, why do we need to specify?
Because it's 2004, man.
Yeah,
Men are still macho.
Christian fantasy that, like, has to please a wide variety of audiences that might be a little more conservative.
Yes. Like, manly hugs. Like,
yeah, that's the only kind that's allowed. Rub some dirt on it.
Right, yeah.
It's fine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Bonnie's mom.
Oh, Bonnie's mom. Yeah, we talked about her a little bit. She was killed.
Yeah. But she was Hartana, who was, like, really cool.
And then she was turned into Irene Silver.
Yes. Oh, and apparently married someone not very nice, because then at the end, Bonnie was like, oh, I don't want to keep my name, that other name. And she's like, oh, why don't you want your father's name? And she's just like, if you knew what he did to us, you wouldn't want his name either. She doesn't want to be Bonnie Connor.
She stays Bonnie Silver, which is a last name that her mom's used over the years.
Then there's Devin. Devin is the principal who actually thinks he is Sir Devin from the Knights, from, like, he's, like, one of Arthur's, like, lesser knights. He, like, never got into the Round Table, but, like, wanted to, because he was, like, a dragon slayer, and then once King Arthur found out that the dragons were actually good, and he was like, hey, let's stop killing them, and Devin was like, no! And so Arthur just kind of banishes him. We don't really know what happens on that end, but we just know that, like, Arthur no longer endorsed Devin, and then Devin went on this, like, rampage. And so then now, centuries later, his ancestor Devin, is he the real Devin, or is he, like, Devin, like, because, like, I thought Hartana gave him a limp from King Arthur's time, or is that just coincidental?
Yes.
Okay, so he is Devin.
I believe Devin and Palin are the same people, and they have some way of being immortal. Okay. It might have to do with killing dragons. I can't remember.
Maybe drinking dragon's blood or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. There's something with the dragon's blood. But... yeah, and which is why, like, the handwriting's the same in the book, and, like, he's so good. Like, the other goons are really clumsy with swords and, like, seem out of place. Like, Neanderthals, they're described as. But him and Palin are, like...
right, this ain't their first rodeo.
So, he's got a vanity tag that starts with IHD, which, like, at first I was like, what? But I think it's, like, I hunt dragons. Or I hate dragons, or something like that. That's my theory.
Oh my god.
Because they're like, oh yeah, like, we've got an APB on this Cadillac, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, why? Like, he's this, like, I am killing dragons for God. I will fight them forever and ever and ever. And then it's just like...
I have a vanity plate.
I've got a vanity plate, yeah. Like... it's so entertaining.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and he's got, like, the brand of the Dragon Slayers or whatever. That at first Bonnie's like, yeah, I have a deformity, that's why I wear a backpack. And he's like, oh yes, I also have this birthmark. Children teased me. And it's like, this isn't the same. You're just trying to make this about you. He's also very convinced that he has God on his side. He's very much like, this is a holy war against the demons. It's really interesting because I feel like a lot of Christian fantasy, it's like, oh, there's the good people that serve God, and there's the bad people that are like, we serve the powers of darkness. And, like, he thinks his cause is justified, and he thinks he's doing the right thing. And if it was written from his perspective, it could very well be an urban fantasy story about these dragon slayers that gotta hunt these evil dragons that are hiding as humans.
Right, absolutely. Which I like the fact that there could be a his side to it. Like, we know he's twisted, and we know, like, that, but, like, there is obviously, he has a reason. It's not just like, I'm evil because evil is what I do.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I got a purpose.
Yeah.
So there's Pollen, which we don't really know that much about, but, like, yeah, he's also knight.
Walter describes him as Rocky.
Yes! Yes. He says, Walter decided to label him Rocky because his build reminded him of a boxer.
I think it's funny, though, that it's like, there's one character in the scene that Walter doesn't know, and he's like, he needs a name so that I know who he is. I'm gonna name him Rocky. Instead of just like, oh, this guy that I'm watching and hiding from.
And then there's Olga.
Poor Olga. She gets the short end of the stick. Because she, like, works for Devin, but it's just kind of like, the only time she shows up, really, is like, oh, we gotta search this girl, and I'm a knight, so I'm not gonna search her, because that'd be creepy. So, Olga,
you go search her. But, like, Olga is, like, shamed for, like, looking like a man?
Yeah, there's several descriptions of her that's like, oh, at first, because she has a little bit of hair on her upper lip, he thought she was a man, but then he looked closer and realized that she was a female, which is such an awkward description. But then, like, I get it. Like, Billy's a 14-year-old boy.
Right.
He's a little oblivious and a little awkward. But then, Jared Bannister runs back into the house to, like, save the cat or whatever, which is also a classic fantasy trope. Save the cat. Not a fantasy trope, just a writing trope. But he runs back in this burning house that they set on fire because the Dragon Slayers came and burned their house down. And, like, gets into a scuffle with her. And so later when he's telling what happened, he's like, yeah, and then I realized she was a woman.
And you're like, come on, guys.
Like, first of all, you were fighting to the death. It doesn't really matter. Second of all, why are you telling your wife and child this? Like, that's not important.
It's also kind of rude.
It's very rude, and it bothers me a little bit, just because it's that, like, oh, haha, look, the bad guys are less beautiful, and
right.
we're gonna, like, make fun of them for their appearance.
Right?
Because they aren't classically attractive.
Right? No good.
Olga. Also, she never, like, shows up again.
Nah.
Like, she's dead.
She's gone. Rip Olga. Then there's, okay, I added this one very, very last minute, but Adam, who's, like, very important for the first part of the book and then never mentioned again.
But then he comes back later.
Okay. I didn't remember that.
So, Adam's a school bully. He's always getting in trouble for, like, smoking and having knives at school. He tries to set off the fire alarm just because, haha, it'd be funny.
Maybe has an unfortunate situation with his parents.
Yeah, his dad seems a little bit, like, bad.
Yeah.
And, like, a jerk, and is, like, this, like, overtired coal mine guy who, like, also drinks and smokes and stuff. So Adam doesn't have great influences, but he's also just kind of mean. Mm-hmm. He tries to look in Bonnie's backpack.
Yeah.
And then he's just kind of not there for a while. And then...
Yes.
Things start appearing on the doorstep of the house where Billy's staying. And he peeks out one time. I don't know why.
Yeah, it's like 5 a.m. or something.
He goes out to get some fresh air, and he sees somebody hiding in the bushes. And he chases him down and tackles him, and it's Adam. And Adam's carrying, like, a Bible.
Right, that Billy puked all over.
Billy had on the mountain, because, like, his dad in his spare time, like, collects Bibles to, like, smuggle into closed countries or whatever. I don't know. He collects Bibles for something.
Right, but, like, he's not a religious person, or, like, he
is somewhat.
Somewhat.
And that's why Bonnie was like, oh, you do follow the Bible.
Right, that's right.
Because he talked about, oh, I have all these Bibles in the back. So, like, Billy had been carrying around this Bible just because he was in shock. And
reminded him of his dad.
So then Adam has this, and he's like, oh, he must have left it, my dad must have left it on the doorstep, and Adam was stealing it. Which I think was true. I'm not sure.
I think that's true.
So he takes it, and his mom's like, you beat up a kid for having a Bible? Like, what?
It's like, who are you?
But then we do find out that Adam was, like, his dad was being threatened, and the Slayer was forcing him to, like, drop off threatening notes.
Oh, okay.
And that's how the note got on the doorstep.
Yes, with Bonnie's hair.
The Slayer was like, put this on the door at this time, or else I'll kill your dad, or whatever.
Right, which there is another part where Devin asks Adam to search Bonnie's backpack. Like, to try and look into it. Which is why, when you're kind of like, oh, this is weird, because, like, Bonnie and, or this is right after Adam gets in trouble, and so you're like, oh, clearly you know it's Adam, and then, like, Adam's in the office later, and he's just like, why don't you, like, look in Bonnie's backpack? And so you're like, oh, okay, they're in cahoots.
Yeah. So Adam's not really, like, that bad. I mean, he's, like, a middle school bully, but he gets threatened. He still cares about his dad, even though his dad's kind of mean. And sort of is, like, the plot point so that you don't have to have as much suspension of disbelief of, like, how did the Slayer do all this stuff and find all this stuff out? It's like, oh, he coerced this kid. And he seems to have a lot of connections, because, like, the insurance won't work for their house when their house burns down, and his mom's like, criminal arson, all arson is criminal. I remember that. I thought it was really funny. And, like, they can't get insurance on their house, and, like, he infiltrates the FBI.
Right.
He gets some fake policemen.
Which, like, if you've been around for, like, 1,500 years, then, like, you develop connections.
Yeah.
Okay. That was all the characters.
Yep. Oh, and Gandalf the cat.
And Gandalf the cat. We cannot forget Gandalf the cat. I, like, forgot that the cat's name was Gandalf until, like, he, like, gives it to him in the hospital, and then I was just like, I'm really confused as to what's happening right now. Because
Gandalf! Right?
Yeah, I'm like, what? This is the wrong book series.
Also, Arlo Hatfield
yes.
is such a funny character, because he's, like, an eccentric hillbilly who raises all these dogs.
Right.
And, like, Billy is like, hey, can I borrow your dog again? And brings him, like, chewing tobacco.
Yeah, yes.
Which is such a strange thing, and somehow knows his favorite kind of chewing tobacco.
Right.
But he's really sweet, and he, like, has a space heater in the kennel for the dogs, because the dogs hate the cold, and, like, that's super sketchy, but also sweet.
Are you tired of your wings not fitting inside of your backpack or clothes? Are you sick of having to have them cramped on the small of your back all day and having no freedom?
Yeah.
Do you want a solution?
Yes.
Have we got the product for you? Clothes and backpacks for wings. We have custom-made holes that you can fit your little feathers or leathery things into. Whether you're half dragon or half avian, everything is for you. We have a selection of colors and patterns. It's like a normal clothing shop, but all of our clothes have holes in them. Check them out at local stores near you. Another trope in tvtropes.org is anyone can die, whether they stay dead is another matter.
Oh my gosh. This whole series.
Right? Right? Just
has
no
that
one dies.
So many times.
No one dies. Yeah. Because, like, you thought Hambone was gone.
You thought the dad was, like, you thought Jared Bannister died. But yeah, Hambone, like, gets shot, the dog that's, like, helping track the dad. And he gets shot, and it's like, oh no, the dog!
Hambone, no!
But they save him. There's characters all through the series that will die, and then come back. So much so that there's one person that dies 3 or 4 times.
Oh my gosh.
Over the course of the 2 series that go together. Makaidos. And so they're like, oh, someone has to sacrifice themselves. It might as well be you, because you keep coming back. Like, they realize it.
They understand. They're self-aware that nobody dies.
They're self-aware that nobody dies.
You go. You've got a great track record.
Or, like, someone will die, but then, like, they can temporarily come back for the wedding at the end. Or whatever.
You're just like, okay.
Like, sure, whatever.
Alright, I feel like we've already talked about parental involvement quite a bit.
Yeah.
Just because they're just so involved, which is very, like, anti-YA. But it's like...
It's kind of cool.
It's a nice change.
Yeah, like, adults who are involved in this fantasy world that realize that.
Right.
And, like, have thought about it.
It's not like, oh, none of the other adults believe me, and so now I still have to go to school and my principal's trying to kill me. It's like, no, You're not going to school anymore.
Yeah, we're gonna homeschool you and teach you sword fighting.
Right.
Yeah, and it's, like, different, even, like, Harry Potter, where, like, all the adults, like, know what's going on, but are also kind of, like... aloof and like, incompetent.
They'll figure it out.
Yeah, like, these people are like, they're children, we have to help them, but also they are kind of special and maybe part of a prophecy.
Right. They do a pretty good balance of, like, getting involved and, like, also letting the kids, which I feel like maybe isn't super realistic of, like, how adults actually are, because it's, like, either you're one or the other. But, I don't know, it's a nice change to, like, not vilify all adults.
Yeah, hashtag not all adults. One thing that's kind of connected to the lore, but I thought would be interesting to talk about, I just thought of it, is like the poems.
Yes.
And specifically, I think it's really interesting because at the beginning there's this poem about like dragons in the past and how they've sort of been corrupted and made everyone think that dragons are all evil, but actually some of them aren't. And there's a sort of part about like one man, I can just read it. Yeah. One man corrupted all his kin, one dragon brought the same, one man redeemed his fallen race, will dragons find the same? Ooh. And I think it's really interesting because I know in a lot of Christian circles, there's this idea that like dragons are evil. You can't have anything with dragons. They're
really
bad. Like I had friends like that. Yeah.
Wow.
Who were like, that's too dangerous, it's too close to like scriptural stuff that compares Satan to a dragon, and lots of cultural stuff that like people like might think like, oh. And so I thought it was super interesting that right at the start of the book, that's sort of introduced as like, yes, this is something.
Right.
But also we're sort of redeeming that.
Yeah.
Which I think is cool, because like, it isn't just ignoring that, but it's also sort of like drawing this parallel of like, redemption of something that's fallen, and there's this whole sort of thing of like the prophecy that you're supposed to like save the dragons.
Right. Yes, that leads us into the prophecy. Do you have it?
Yeah. So it's called Merlin's Prophecy. When hybrid meets the fallen seed, the virgin seedling flies. An orphan waif shall call to me when blossom meets the skies. The child of doubt will find his rest and meet his virgin bride. A dragon shorn will live again, rejecting Eden's pride. A slayer comes, and with his host he fights the last of thee. But faith alone shall win the war, the test of those set free. A king shall rise from Arthur's mold, the prophet's book in hand. He takes the sword from mountain stone to rescue captive bands.
Alright, okay.
So, dragon shorn, this is why Clefspear thinks he won't die.
Right.
Because he sort of has to live again, he has to, like, redeem himself. Mm-hmm. The slayer comes, there's a sort of idea of Bonnie's faith.
Yes.
With the sword, that makes the sword light up.
And, like, Billy identifies himself as a child of doubt.
Yes. Which also is really awkward because then he's supposed to, like,
meet his virgin bride.
Yeah. Which, spoilers, Bonnie and Billy get together.
Right, if you haven't guessed it now.
Yeah. Also, though, it's super awkward because there are many times that they're like, oh, we're like siblings. Like, oh, she's like a really close sister to me. Or she's like, wow, like he's not like all the other creepy guys. He's like my brother.
Right.
And then they're like, we're closer than siblings. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Doesn't seem right.
That's fine.
That's fine.
Like, I appreciate that their relationship is kind of, like, they're 14.
Right.
And they kind of have, like, a sweet, innocent sort of relationship where they're, like, acknowledge that, like, oh, this could be really awkward.
Right.
It's not going to be. So, like, they have to, like, huddle together with Bonnie's wings wrapped around them for warmth, which is also a trope. It's like, oh no, we have to huddle together for warmth. Oh no, there's only one bed.
Right,
like,
right, yeah.
Fan fiction trope. But, like, it's also, like, I feel comfortable with you.
Right.
And safe, and it isn't like dramatic pining and angst and all the like emotions and romance.
Right.
Like,
which like makes sense because like not only can like they tell each other that like, oh, I'm half dragon, but it's like,
yeah,
me too. It's like that shared experience and that shared like,
yeah,
we can't tell people that we are part dragon.
Yeah. And they're both like really nice people.
Yeah, which you were saying something about the Oracles of Fire, which is the prequel,
yes,
where they see the prophecy as well.
Yes, so it's super interesting because the next series, so there's 4 books in Dragons in Our Midst. Then there's Oracles of Fire. The first book happens before Dragons in Our Midst. The rest happen afterwards. But there's characters in that who also find out about this prophecy because it's really old and see it as applying to themselves because there's another character that's considers himself a child of doubt, and there's like this whole thing with like people being these hybrid girls that are being grown from plants that like think they're that, and there's like this plant growing that's like the blossom meets the skies and all this other stuff that they're like, oh, this prophecy is about us. So it's super interesting because at first it's like, oh yeah, the prophecy's fulfilled pretty much,
right,
like cool, you guys are the chosen ones. But then it's sort of like, are you? Like, you're in this situation and you're involved in this prophecy.
Right.
But are you really the only chosen one?
Right. Yeah. Does the prophecy only apply once? Or, like, were they both right? It's, like, really interesting.
Like, because you have this prophecy that has spanned so much time, sometimes it seems kind of weird, like, oh, are you the first person that these things applied to? Like, what a coincidence. But I thought that was kind of interesting.
Right. I do think also, moving on to faith integration, the book does a pretty good job of doing that in not a, like, sometimes it's kind of cheesy. Like, there's some parts where it's just kind of like, okay, laying it on pretty thick. But other times it's like, oh, okay, wow, like, I wouldn't go as far to be like, oh, that makes sense, because it's fantasy. Like, nothing makes sense. But it is done in, like, I think a respectful way that it's not like, all Christians are the heroes, and, like, all non-Christians are trying to evil everything.
Yeah, I appreciate that, like, you have characters who have really strong faith. It's not like, and the moral of the story is that we all need to pray and accept Jesus at the end of the book. Because that, like, sort of cheapens the plot.
Yeah.
Like, it's part of the plot, but it's because it's important to those characters.
Right.
So, like, Bonnie as a person and as a character has really strong faith. And so that's part of her story and her sort of, like, character moments, and it's not just like, oh, everyone has faith. And like, that's definitely something I see throughout the series. Like, Bonnie is super strong in her faith, and Billy's kind of like, I don't know, like, and that's because it's like a big thing in the lore. That's sort of hard for Billy because he's like, I kind of know like the idea of things, but it's not really my own.
Right, and it's not really his world yet. It's like,
yeah,
still kind of foreign.
He's the, like, outsider character that we get to experience the story through, whereas Bonnie kind of knows what's going on. So if we had the whole story from her point of view of, like, her moving to this new place, like, we get scenes in her point of view, but she's not really the main character, it would feel a little weird because she already knows all these things. But with Billy, we sort of get to learn things with him. But yeah, there's quite a bit of faith integration, both in, like, the plot and the lore, because, like, dragons are... miraculously, through the power of God, turned into humans.
Right.
But then also, like, certain people.
Right, yeah. It's a pretty good, like, hand-wavy thing to be just like, God. You're like, oh, okay, cool.
God. Yeah. And it does a lot of really interesting things with it. It's not just like, oh, we're gonna have a generic Christ figure because we want
right,
to.
because we're a Christian book, so we have to.
So we gotta. I think it works as its own thing. Like, I feel like it has to work as a story on its own and not just be like, the excuse for why this is bad is God.
Right.
It does kind of fit, like, with the way the magic system, if we want to call it that, is established. Right. Like, there are still rules. There's still sort of, like, your faith has to help with this.
Right.
Like, things like that.
Yeah. All right. I want to talk about a couple descriptions.
Okay. Please
Some of my favorites. First of all, like, word definitions. Shinnied down the tree. I always thought it was shimmied down the tree, but it's...
I thought so, too.
Shinnied?
To shimmy. Another form of the term shimmy.
Yeah, so I guess they're just, like, shimmying for cool people. Anyway.
Yeah.
It's when he's, like, trying not to fall down a tree. And it says, his legs turned wobbly. 2 strands of cooked spaghetti struggling to hold up a desperate boy.
I really liked that one. That one was so funny, because it's like, oh yeah, I've felt that. Like, after a big day of workout, like,
right, yeah,
trying to walk up the stairs,
yeah,
and you're like, ugh. But it is really funny.
I also thought, this isn't a description, but it was, Billy, do you remember the airport's main number? And he's like, yes, of course I do, mother. And you're like, what? What?
Yeah. Well, because his dad, like, does, like, charter, like, he'll, like, take skydivers or, like, business people or whatever. And it's a really small airport.
And it was a time before people actually had things, like, memorized in their phones, and people, like, knew that they had,
Yeah, like, Professor Hamilton has a phone with satellite service.
Right.
But he also, like, Walter doesn't really know what a GPS is.
Right.
It's like, your GPS, what's it?
Yes.
And he's like, oh yes, Walter, the global positioning system.
And he also, Professor Hamilton didn't purchase the call waiting feature. Old tech. Anyway, my next description is, every thought swirled in a Kansas-sized tornado. Stumbling about in the corridors of his own mind, he felt lost in a carnival maze of mirrors.
Ooh.
Pretty good, huh?
Yeah. There's some fun descriptions that are just like, ooh. I remember the beginning, it's like he fell like a sock of marbles.
Yes.
Like in his dream.
Yes.
I'm like, huh, yeah, I can picture that. I've never seen that.
Right.
But I can picture it.
He doesn't sound comfortable.
He does a decent job of, like, switching character voices. Like, Bonnie is a writer. She's a lot more eloquent. And so, like, when she's looking at things, like, I can't remember if it's in this book, but, like, there's one time, I think it's in the next book, where she, like, looks at the trees and imagines them being, like, supermodels wrapped in the snow that's their outfits, or, like, she has very, like, a lot more flowery descriptions, because that's kind of who she is, whereas Billy's a lot more, like, quirky, weird metaphors. Also, there's some description of, I think it's his mom, where it's like, oh yeah, she looks a lot like Billy, but she was definitely female. And I'm like,
yes.
Oh, what does that mean? Like, I know what it means, but it's a little uncomfortable.
Right, like, oh.
Yeah, there's a couple of those where it's like, oh, I'm a manly man, or like, oh.
It's definitely another manly hug moment. 2004, man. 2004. So what makes it YA, Mary?
You have discovery of a secret destiny, like discovery of your identity and figuring out what that means. But besides just like coming of age, which this is definitely starts to be a coming of age story, there's also like, I'm a dragon. What does that mean? Wow. Sort of this like, there's something special about you. You definitely have sort of a chosen one trope, even though there's not one person. There's definitely like,
more of a, like, you were made for something else.
You have Bonnie, who's an orphan, whose mom was killed by a villain, and then she has to face him later. Yeah.
Right, and she's very much in this, like, me, myself against the world.
Yeah, you have Professor Hamilton, we talked about him before, wise old eccentric mentor.
Yes.
Honestly, if we wanted to do all the tropes, we'd find out he's secretly someone's father, but, like, that doesn't happen.
Right, yeah. That would be the whole thing that they'd have to add to, like,
Gives the most.
Yeah, there are a couple of things that, like, that cause you to just, like, suspend a whole lot of disbelief. That it's just like, oh.
Yeah.
Okay. One of them, I think, was, like, how is his dad getting things to his doorstep? Is he, like, flying there in the middle of the night?
And he asks, and he's like, we dragons have our ways.
But actually, how did you do that? And, like, if you are coming to our house every once in a while, could we, like, talk on the porch or something? Anyway, it's, like, not important. Not important.
You also have a sort of classic, like, good versus evil clash. Yeah. Like, I think there's two, from what I've seen and from what I've read, there's two types of YA. You have sort of edgy, everything is super morally gray. Are these characters really heroes? We don't know. Like, we care about them, but one example would be, like, Six of Crows. I don't know if you've read that, but, like, we should read that at some point.
All right, writing it down.
Super fun. Fantasy heist, essentially. Ooh. But all of those characters are, like, very morally gray, and you're like, I don't know, like, very edgy, sort of angsty YA. And then you have the, like, classic good versus evil clash, where even if the good guys, like, have doubts, they're still obvious, like, like, big, large scale, like, save the world or save something, fight evil kind of thing. This seems to fall in a lot more. That, like, there's a prophecy, and we must stop these people that are trying to kill us.
Right.
And, like, evil organizations.
Yeah. One thing I realized about reading the book again is it's very violent in its descriptions, and I remember that phase of my middle school years, because it's talking about how much pain everyone is in all the time.
Yeah.
So the first part was, like, when Bonnie gets her, like, head dragged out of a window of, like, broken glass, and the shards are, like, digging into her neck, and she's got, like, dried blood all over the back, and stuff like that you're just like, oh, okay. It's, like, very, very much in most of my, like, middle school reading.
Yeah.
All very violent.
It's like, oh, okay. Like, we're finally at the point where we don't have to gloss over it for little kids.
Right.
So we're just gonna go for it.
Right, we're just gonna go all out, and you're just like, oh, wow, I feel my bones also in pain, and, like, yeah. When they get off the plane, and, like, the descriptions of the different people, it's just, like, everyone's just, like, matted and, like, sweaty, but also, like, covered in dirt, and, like,
just exhausted.
Dried blood. Yeah, but, like, somehow finding the strength to, like, pull themselves up when they need to.
One thing going on with that I really appreciate is that, like, the injuries still are there. Like, in a lot of shows especially, but also in a lot of books, it's like, oh, we got injured or stabbed, but then, like, 2 scenes later, it's like, oh, but there's no consequences for that. Whereas Bonnie, like, she hurts her knee, and then, like, the whole story she's either on crutches or, like, limping and trying to
or someone's carrying her.
Yeah, like, there's consequences, and, like, people get hurt, and they stay hurt, instead of just, even if they don't stay dead.
Yes.
They stay hurt.
Right.
And there's, like, consequences for that, instead of, like, oh, I made this person get injured, but, like, as a writer, I gotta have them fight this person, so we're just gonna ignore it.
Right, so we've got this mysterious cream.
Like, it's fine. But, like, I appreciate that there's, like, longer consequences for some of those things.
It is pretty cool.
And, like, Billy, like, wakes up in the hospital. Like, he doesn't just, like, almost die.
Right. Or, like, his mom's ankles, like, she twists them, and that is, like, she can't walk, so she's just like, go on without me.
It's very easy to make the, like, these characters are invincible because they're the heroes.
And, like, yeah, Billy, like, almost dies, and is at the point where it's just like, I don't actually think he's going to be able to live through this. It brings you farther to that point than most, like, for that age range would.
Yeah, they're the hero. Or it's like, oh, they almost die, but they're not really out of commission. Like, Billy almost dies before the showdown, and then he's just out. Like, he can't do anything. He's not like, oh, I gotta push through. It's like, no,
you're done.
You cannot move.
You're done.
You're in the hospital.
Yeah. That was it.
Super exciting. Is that it?
Yeah.
Wow.
We did it.
I feel like I had other things, but I don't remember them.
Oh, no.
Also, the back cover description is super dramatic.
Yeah.
Like the first paragraph, it's like, a boy learns of his dragon past. A girl has known of hers for years. They combine their faith, courage, and love to overcome an evil slayer who seeks to bring an end to dragon heritage. Forever.
Oh my gosh.
And then it's like, the kids at school call Billy Dragon Breath for good reason.
Gosh. You're like, what?
And it starts to just be like a middle school coming of age story. Also, that would be a great, like, movie trailer where it starts like super gritty narrator voice. Like the Honest Trailers guy.
Yes.
And then it's like, oh, haha. He's like walking through school awkwardly. And it's like, poor Billy.
Yes.
He feels like an outcast. But one day, he meets Bonnie Silver. She's not like other girls.
Oh my gosh.
That is something that bothered me a little bit.
Yeah.
There was a little bit
There
of that.
was
Like,
quite a bit of that.
oh, there is the one type of woman that's good.
Yeah.
Who's, like, very modest and, like, kind and supportive.
Right.
And, like...
intelligent and, like...
and, like, cares about her appearance enough to look nice.
Right.
But doesn't care too much to be vain.
Yeah. There's, like, a very narrow margin that she's, like, operating in.
Like, Bonnie tries to, like, be nice about it, but she still does have a little bit of that, like, oh, these other girls who are, like, flirting.
Right, and, like, Jessica.
Oh,
gosh, she's a jerk.
yeah. And then he's like, oh, she's not like all the other girls who are, like, talking about petty things.
Yeah. But I feel like that's more of, like, a failed understanding on Billy's part of, like, what girls actually are like.
Could be. He doesn't seem to know very many of them. He hangs out before school and, like, drinks root beer and burps and tells crazy stories with his friends. Also, his closest friend is, besides Walter, is a girl he met, like, 2 days ago.
Well, yeah.
Like, he's like, Walter and Bonnie are, like, his older friends.
It's a little sad. But, like, they're great friends. So, like, I bet it doesn't feel sad.
Yeah, they're really good. But he like, something he thinks about Bonnie, like, oh, that this is his closest friend now. And I'm like, oh.
Yeah. And, like, they haven't known each other for that long. And you're just like, oh, okay.
But she helped him scrub graffiti off the wall,
that's the mark of real friendship.
Yeah.
You probably noticed that we have some pretty awesome music scattered out throughout the entire thing. We didn't credit the person who made it because he hadn't made it when we were recording it last time, and we didn't know that he was going to because I hadn't asked him. But the music for our podcast was made by Brendan Wallace. You can check him out on Spotify and SoundCloud as Astronun. Check out his stuff. He's got some amazing stuff out there. So
it's so good.
So good. Would recommend.
Thank you, Brendan. Thank you so much.
Also, follow us on Twitter. Tweet at us what you think. I got a whole bunch of people, like, that love me. So listen to the podcast. They didn't listen to the podcast and then love me. The order is important.
Yeah, same.
But thank you everyone who listened to our last one, and thank you for everyone who listened to this one. Your love and support is so appreciated. Definitely tweet us what you think. Leave comments.
For sure.
We'll get better at posting more stuff on Twitter and letting you know a little further in advance what we're reading. But this has just been super, super fun. So I'm still enjoying it. Are you enjoying it, Mary?
Yeah. Yes. I'm enjoying it so much. And it gets me to, like, read fun books instead of just being like, oh, I'm an adult. I should read this important thing, which is also important. But sometimes it's nice to take a break and just, like, throw back to, like, oh my gosh, I can't remember. Like, I remember reading this before. Wow.
Especially reading this book, I can link back to a lot of things that spawned from reading this book in a lot of phases.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Thank you, Bryan Davis, for that.
Yep.
Yes.
For our childhood.
If you stuck with us through this one and want to read our next book, we are going to be doing Maximum Ride, The Angel Experiment.
Woo!
More kids with wings.
Yeah, more wings, more kids, more people hunting them.
It's such a fun time. Mary really loves The Dragons in Our Midst and read them multiple times in her childhood. I think I read it like once.
I was obsessed with them as a kid.
I, on the other hand, was obsessed with Maximum Ride. So
it'll be great. I read it once, I think. Didn't read the whole series.
So it's going to be the same thing that this one was, but flipped. So if you like hearing us get excited about things,
I'm so excited.
Tune in.
It'll be great. And after that, well, if you tweet us before we do the next one, we might not have decided what we're reading. So give us some suggestions. Yeah.
Let us know. Cool.
We didn't do our ads.
Yeah. Well, we can do them at the end.